Welcome to the Big Four Accounting Firms podcast, brought to you by big4accountingfirms.com and the Big Four Accounting Firms YouTube channel. Before we get started, just wanted to remind everybody to support us if you have a chance or if you can. Even $1 helps, and we have a link in the description to a website called Buy Me a Coffee. It's just a way to donate to us and support us. Again, any amount is helpful so that we can keep putting out content. And there's also other ways for you to support us in the show notes to this podcast or on YouTube in the description. In today's podcast, we're going to be talking about a New York Times article that came out. And the New York Times article that came out specifically discussed robots replacing jobs for accountants. And this came out in, like I said, the New York Times, which is the quote unquote paper of record in the United States. This is obviously an easy article to write right now during COVID-19 because there's tons of jobs being replaced by automation. Not necessarily because of automation and progress in technology, but because people are working from home. And not only that, but since we can't interact in person as much as we used to, now the push towards replacing humans and contactless purchasing is ramping up. So because of this, you're going to get articles like this from the New York Times about, oh, it's not just at Walmart, it's not just at your big box store where you're going to see less people, it's in these white collar jobs. And these articles have been written ever since I started in accounting. So I know a lot of people read these articles, people looking for jobs in the big four accounting firms, and they're like, oh no, my job's going to be replaced. And partners have been saying that for I don't know how long. You know, the technology is going to replace X, Y, and Z. And the way the New York Times and a lot of these newspapers and business magazines approach it is they have a narrative they want to tell, right? Which is, in this case, it's robots are replacing not only the low skill labor, but the high skill labor in accounting. And then they kind of back their way into it. They interview the people that will fit the narrative. But if they came to me on this podcast, I would tell them, oh man, yeah, robots are definitely going to replace accountants, right? Well, then why are the big four accounting firms hiring more people than ever? Why are they breaking records for employment? Even during the pandemic, they laid people off. But still, they're hiring way more people now that they realize they're getting tons of work from the pandemic. So that really destroys the narrative, because if any part of this were true and the white collar worker jobs were going down, you should see like a 10-20% decrease in the big four accounting firms and just accounting jobs in general. And what a lot more of what's happening is like outsourcing. Either accounting departments are outsourcing to the big four is outsourcing to low cost labor. But the big four accounting firms still have not figured out how to completely get rid of jobs, completely get rid of humans. And another thing that I would encourage people to do is also read the book Life After Google. And all this artificial intelligence, all this technology thing will run up against what ultimately becomes an issue of the cost of power, because to run artificial intelligence and machine learning takes so much power, and it takes so much power to cool down the data centers that are necessary to replicate human thinking and machine learning, that it ultimately won't be worth it versus using humans. And I say all that, but to say that it is easy to replace some jobs, because there's a lot of accountants, there's a lot of professionals that all they do is data entry or ticking and tying things out. But I still think a lot of ticking and tying is done in person, because you can't really tick and tie through automation, because that would defeat the purpose of ticking and tying. Even if the work is done by an automated process, accounts are still always going to have to tick and tie, just because you can't fully trust a process, because there's human intervention in there. There's potential for human intervention in the process, and accountants have to verify that that there's not a human in there manipulating it, and they have to test certain things. And if they don't, and they do rely on that, that's where you're going to get all the fraud from. So, and the article talks also about some of the technologies being used, like UiPath. I don't know if they mention Alteryx and Tableau, but all this stuff. Oh, they mention Automation Anywhere and Blue Prism, and how a lot of these companies are going to go public. But the big four accounting firms have been using those. We've been talking about that, and they talk about the thousands of hours that are being saved. Well, that's a lot of manipulation in that as well. For example, in the big four accounting firms, you're told to save hours. But what happens is, if in trying to save hours, you spend more hours trying to save hours and putting hours into the systems that are quote unquote saved, that just like the total hours being worked is about the same. So you're going to see this everywhere. Tens of thousands of hours, but how many hours are put into saving those hours and figuring out ways to save those hours? Ultimately, same amount of hours in my view. And I don't think accountants have to worry, especially if you're a hardworking accountant. If you stay busy in the big four accounting firms, it's still a long ways away until somebody replaces your job. But I do think there is a danger in the big four accounting firms of ultimately being replaced by a technology solution. But it's just because the big four accounting firms are lazy from an audit perspective and run into these scandals that ultimately there could be a technology solution that could replace accountants and give security over the financial statements, just because big four accountants aren't doing their jobs. They're getting caught where their work papers aren't good enough. They aren't reviewing things. It's more of a high level review than an audit. And they're not scoping the project right. They're not detecting the risks. And the way accountants work is they work in industries and they specialize in that industries. They learn the risks, they learn the accounting principles, and they apply it across that industry. Well, there's no saying that somebody in technology or software could write a program that could do that quicker and do it better. Now, the problem is there's a lot of solutions out there that pretend to do this, but they don't, because things people in technology and software don't really like accounting, and accounting is really complex for many reasons. And one of the reasons that accounting is really complex is because not everybody does their financials in the same way. Not everybody records their transactions in the same way. Not everybody records transactions at the level of detail across different business units, across regions, in the perfect way for a software solution. And so this it makes it extremely difficult to automate everything and make it completely auditable. And that's why you need accountants, because accountants can tell the difference, or they can say, you don't have this level of detail. You need to spike this out. Where's the support for this? Because what people figure out when they come in to try and solve accounting and say this should, like I've seen so many people in software and technology say this should be easy. Like this should be easy. But then they go and looking at the client's data set and they're like, well, you don't have this financial data split out this way. And we need it that way. And the person looks at them and says, yeah, we don't have it at that level of detail because we never knew we need it. Because companies start out and they record their level of detail at a certain level of detail, and they don't break it out any further. They don't break it out by region, by business unit, by spiking a little piece of data into a million different bits that can be used by tax, audit, transfer pricing, etc. And so you can't completely automate everything. Sometimes you have to look at one piece of financial data and then spike it out. And that takes work because it's never been done before. And sometimes you have to go back into the past and spike that out. So everybody that gets into financial technology at some point realizes this, and they run into this issue. So that's what makes it really hard to replace accountants. And if this person who wrote this article just started from record employment in accounting, and it's only going up. And the big four accounting firms are only making more money. And the way the big four accounting firms make money is by hours worked by their employees. So do you have to be worried that robots are going to replace you? No way. Are robots part of the working environment at the big four accounting firms? Yes, and they will be. So you have to learn UiPath. You're going to have to learn Blue Prism and all these other technologies. But that doesn't mean your job's going to be replaced. It just means the way you're going to do your work is going to change. So that's the podcast for today. To get future updates, make sure to subscribe to this podcast. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. And if you can, support us through the Buy Me a Coffee link in the show notes. And there's other ways for you to support us in the show notes as well by buying our books or checking out our interview course. Thanks for listening.